Hello, and welcome to this listening practice test. You will hear a conversation. First, you will have some time to look at questions 1 to 10. Now, listen carefully and answer questions 1 to 10.
When something falls apart, we have a choice. We can gather the pieces and put them back together exactly as they were, or we can figure out how to build something better. The pandemic broke everything. It exposed so many cracks in our economy, in jobs, education, healthcare, housing policy, and it showed how inequality makes every single one of those problems worse. Here in the United States and around the world, governments did the unthinkable. They sent money directly to people so they could buy food and pay rent. They made testing free and expanded healthcare to cover more people. They gave businesses money to stay afloat while entire sectors were shut down. Millions of people had their student debt canceled. All of this and more was done without raising taxes and without the usual endless fights about how to pay for it. To me, this was astonishing, and I'm an economist, so I rarely say that. But as someone who spends her time trying to change how we think about government spending and deficits, I saw an opportunity, a chance to explain why the federal budget does not work like a household budget, why all that red ink for them translates into black ink for us, and why our country can still afford to invest in everything we need, even after spending trillions to fight a pandemic. For a while, it felt like the United States and other nations were finally breaking free from old patterns of thinking about debt and taxes. But now, look, just months after such bold action, we are already slipping back into the old mindset. Can we build affordable housing and fix our crumbling infrastructure? Can we expand Medicare to cover dental, vision, and hearing? Can we address the climate crisis? As Congress debates these questions, everyone starts asking the same thing: how will you pay for it? That is the wrong question. The real questions have nothing to do with money. Instead of worrying about where the funding will come from, we should be asking whether these things are worth doing. Do we have the real resources, the people, the equipment, the raw materials, the technology to make it happen? Because these things would genuinely improve society. And do we have the political will to act? I am part of a group of economists who have helped develop a framework called MMT, or Modern Monetary Theory. MMT accurately describes the nature of currencies like the US dollar and the British pound. It reminds us that the gold standard is long gone. This means that finding the money to pay for what we need is simply not a problem for countries like the United States or the UK. If we are going to fix what is broken in our economy, we have to change how we think about the limits of government spending. Let me give you an example of the kind of outdated thinking that still shapes our conversations. Back in the 1980s, a British prime minister said something that still echoes today. She said, "The state has no source of money other than the money people earn themselves. If the state wishes to spend more, it can only do so by borrowing your savings or by taxing you more. It is your money." You may have heard a modern version of this idea. There is no magic money tree. The message is always the same. Everything must be paid for, and the taxpayer is ultimately on the hook for every dollar the government spends. It sounds scary. We know that when we borrow money as individuals to pay for college, start a business, or buy a home, that debt becomes our personal burden. We have to find a way to pay it back. Too much personal debt can lead to all kinds of problems. Even small businesses and huge corporations have to be careful with loans. But the federal government is fundamentally different. Unlike the rest of us, Congress never has to check its bank account balance to see if it can afford to spend more. The issuer of the currency, the federal government, can never run out of money. It can afford to buy anything that is for sale in its own currency. Today, that could mean spending money on roads and bridges, military equipment, or hospitals and schools. Getting the votes to pass a spending bill might be hard, but finding the money? That is never the problem. The money can simply be created. Here's how it works. When Congress and the president agree to increase spending, the central bank works with the financial system to make that money appear in our accounts. It all happens electronically. Money isn't physically printed. If you received a stimulus check from the federal government last year, or if your business got a loan to cover payroll, you received newly created digital dollars made to support the economy. No taxpayer was involved in that process. It took no more than a few keystrokes. So why do we constantly hear that we need to raise taxes to pay for infrastructure and other investments? One word: deficits. We have all been trained to worry about the deficit. Lawmakers look for ways to increase spending without increasing the deficit. It's a whole game of paying for things. Unfortunately, the deficit is almost always portrayed as something terrible, and I'd like to change that. When we hear the word deficit, we think of a lack, a shortage of something. It sounds threatening. So when we hear that the federal government ran a multi-trillion-dollar deficit, it feels frightening. It even makes people angry. But there's another way to look at it. Just as the number 6 looks like a 9 from a different angle, a government budget deficit looks like a financial surplus when you flip your perspective. Deficit hawks look at a chart of government spending and see nothing but a sea of red, dangerous ink. I see it differently. Here's what I see. I see what's happening on the other side of the government's ledger. When the government spends more than it collects in taxes, it's injecting money into the economy. Their red ink is our black ink. From this perspective, it becomes clear that every deficit benefits someone. The question is, who does it benefit and what does it allow us to achieve? What matters is how the money is spent and who ultimately gets that boost. Cutting taxes in a way that primarily helps the wealthy without creating investment or opportunity for everyone else is a poor use of deficit spending. On the other hand, spending trillions to support the economy during a pandemic puts the deficit to good use. We experienced the shortest recession in U.S. history. In my view, that was money responsibly spent. Being financially responsible does not mean running the government like a household. Instead of obsessing over the deficit, Congress should focus on managing inflation. That is the real constraint on spending. That is what we need to watch when we talk about spending trillions on things like infrastructure, healthcare, and education. Instead of asking who is going to pay for it, Congress should be asking how do we mobilize the resources we need. To answer that, we need to think about people, factories, equipment, raw materials like lumber and steel. If we are going to build high-speed rail, upgrade old infrastructure, and transition to a green economy, we'll need concrete, steel, and wood. We'll need construction workers, architects, and engineers. We'll need companies that can produce solar panels, EV charging stations, and electric school buses at scale. If we have the industrial capacity to deliver all of that, then we have the resources. Or take healthcare and education. Paying the bills to expand Medicare to cover dental, vision, and hearing is easy. The challenge is finding enough dentists, eye doctors, and hearing specialists to treat everyone who needs care. And if you want to make college free, you need professors, classrooms, and dorms to teach and house the students. In an economy at full employment, all those resources are, well, fully employed. There's no slack in the system. If the government tried to invest in everything at once, it would quickly discover there aren't enough workers or materials. It would have to compete with the private sector for those resources, driving up wages and prices. That would cause inflation, and that would be irresponsible. But we're a long way from full employment. We have all the resources we need to start fixing our broken systems. We just have to believe it's possible. We cannot let words like debt and deficit stand in our way. Armed with a better understanding of public money, where it comes from and how it works, we can tackle the real deficits that actually burden us. In every crisis, there's opportunity. We can take the pieces and try to rebuild the fragile systems we had before the pandemic, or we can build something new. We can shape from our abundant resources a world we actually want to live in, one that cares for people and our planet. I truly hope we choose to be brave. Thank you.
Now you have some time to check your answers.